Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's live stream discussion on Dylan Avery's The Unspeakable, which is a documentary on 9/11. And unlike other documentaries that we've covered on this channel and that I think have gotten a lot of popularity, this one focuses really on the human element. The people who are interviewed in this documentary all lost people on 9/11. And so they are personally invested. They have skin in the game. They're not just people who are curious or wondering about government um, complicity. They lost people. Their lives were changed as a result of this event. And that's part of what drives them. Some of them shared, one of who is an engineer, said he didn't even think about it for 5 years. And there's a perfect example of accepting a narrative uncritically until such time as you're able to really look at the situation and say, is that really the story I should accept? Does that make any sense? A couple really great quotes from the documentary that I appreciated. One, lies need protecting, the truth doesn't. It's a really great line, and it's a very true sentiment. Lies need protecting, the truth doesn't need protecting. And that's part of understanding the whole issue around people crying fake news and Facebook having all of these monitors telling you if it's the truth, it's the truth. Lies need protecting. The truth doesn't need protection. Sobe, thank you. I'm going to keep doing the videos for a while at least. Another quote that I really appreciate is that the concept of the cover up is only 6 inches deep, but it's a mile long. And that's what we've talked about before. Just scratch a little bit and you'll see there's a problem here and the problem here and a problem here. And how do you tie that all together? That's why I say I don't have some grand narrative for 9/11. But what I do know is that numerous people are implicated in it. Biggest video on this channel on this subject is the video I did on the dancing Israelis. 20,000 views so far. It's still going. Lots of people are interested in that subject, obviously. I didn't tell them to search for that search term. They did for their own reasons. Why is that? Because that's one aspect of it. The put options, something else I've talked about before. So someone in the financial industry knew about it. You have people, you have questions of what was happening with the World Trade Center in terms of insurance. How much did Larry Silverstein insure the buildings for? The fact that he said that he wanted to pull Building 7, that means that people had to wire those buildings for demolition. Who wired those buildings for demolition? So there are a number of different people involved, and you have government officials, people like Dick Cheney asking, has the order been changed? Norman Mineta making testimony for the 9/11 Commission. All of these people together are impacting. That's the idea of a mile wide. There's a mile wide. The truth is only 6 inches deep, but it's a mile wide. So there's a lot to put together, but clearly there's a problem. One of the engineers who's on camera, I've seen him in previous documentaries. I didn't realize he was actually killed that day in the towers. He was a big fan of the World Trade Center. He had watched them being built, and one of his friends is in the documentary and talking about him. I think after the World Trade Center bombing in '93, that was in the basement. And they talked about all the redundancies in the building, that you need to do more than just blow out the basement. There's too many things holding this building up. And he's on camera saying the building could take multiple plane hits because it would be like a pencil going into a mosquito netting, that the entire mosquito netting isn't going to collapse because a pencil went through part of it. So you also have to look back to the original certifications of the building, that it was certified to be hit by a fully loaded 707, a Boeing 707, which was a very big plane at that time, and still not collapse, obviously. So the idea was they didn't build it such that if a plane did crash in, it would collapse. So people somehow memory hole all of these bits of information, that all of these things had been anticipated. You get that there are these two tall buildings, and yes, a plane might wander into it. In fact, I think I don't remember. I didn't have time to look it up before the stream, but I'm almost certain that a plane did hit the towers, like a Cessna or something, when there was fog in the city and accidentally wandered in. So they had to plan for those sorts of things before. So I think the human element of this documentary really struck me more than anything. This wasn't about introducing a bunch of new facts. Everyone in the documentary was broadly familiar. You could tell they were familiar with the story, and they could walk through any number of elements of the story with understandable skepticism. But they didn't really focus on that. They focused, I think, very rightly on the people who are forgotten in the story, these victims, and where their bodies are. You could see a father breaks down very early in the video about how fortunate he felt that he and his wife had a body to bury. Now, interestingly, in the case of his son in particular, he was killed in such a way that a coroner who didn't know where the body was from, etc., just looked at the case and said, well, this would have to have been killed by an explosion of some kind. The problem was he was not in the tower, he was across the street. So his body was found on the other side. And they the coroner said this must have been due to an explosive device. Well, what was an explosive device doing in and around the base of the World Trade Center, unless it was one of the things that was happening prior to the demolition? You have to have these explosive charges go. And this young man, unfortunately, was caught by this. Yes, as I said, unlike other documentaries which we've covered, which are more informative, trying to build facts and trying to examine questions and say, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And I've loved those documentaries for this. This documentary is not that. This documentary is a human interest documentary where we get to see how these people's lives have been specifically impacted. And here, all these years later, you can still see them getting very emotional. And I understand that even from a distance. I can understand that. And I appreciate them coming on. And you can see one Englishman, I sort of made a note to myself. He says, is it okay that, we're getting emotional about it? As if, as usual, the English don't want to get too emotional on camera, and just sort of apologizing almost in advance. But you could see this is someone who was very deeply moved by the death of his friend and was just asking the documentarian, am I going to mess up your documentary by getting emotional? And instead, what he did was brought a lot of humanity to what we were watching. So that's all I really wanted to say about the Unspeakable. One other thing was the mention of a number, which I think is important, but I hadn't considered, which was this idea of 30,000 soldiers who have taken their life. And I say soldiers, I say military members in general, because they could be Air Force, Navy, Marines, who have taken their lives since 9/11 due to combat operations in Iraq, Afghanistan. And we have to ask, remember, who benefits, who would benefit most from 9/11, what the Project for the New American Century called a new Pearl Harbor. The military industry, the defense industry, and the people who intend on maintaining American hegemony until the end of time. And who paid the price? These people in the military who ended up committing suicide due to the horrors that they faced in war. That's just one statistic from all the other people who were affected. So we see this butterfly effect of these families who are affected by these 3,000 deaths, and then each effect, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But I would encourage you to give it a watch. If you did not have a chance to watch it before today's discussion, I would, but go in there knowing that this is more a documentary focused on the human element. It's not a documentary focused on this particular fact or Building 7 or the Pentagon or anything like that. They're just talking to different people and hearing their stories. And I think it was really useful and helpful in that way. Any questions in the chat? If not, we will wrap up the stream. I'm going to head over to Palestine Bookshelf in about 20 minutes. We're going to be talking about an Al Jazeera documentary that was done late last year called War Crimes Investigated, in which they go through and look at all of the social media postings from these Israeli soldiers about the war crimes they're committing. That one's a pretty tough watch, but also, like this one, very focused on the human element. All right. Well, thank you for stopping by. As I said, if you have any thoughts or comments, even if you're watching this on replay, just put them in the comments. The discussion can continue there. And as I said, if you are interested in joining me over on Palestine Bookshelf, I'll be there in about 20 minutes talking about an Al Jazeera documentary called War Crimes Investigated. Thanks for stopping by.